Development on Microsoft Flight Simulator continues apace. This week, the team discussed DLSS as well as AMD FSR. There's also news on World Update 9, multi-screen support, and much more, so let's jump in. I'll begin with the item that probably have most interest, multi-screen support. This is come in, it's been worked on for quite a while. Apparently, Asobo now have internal builds on this with multi-screen working. It does require some further work though. Currently, they're deciding whether or not it will fit into Sim Update 10, that would be in June. Asobo have said there's still some work to do on this though, so a final decision hasn't yet been made. That said, it sounds as though things are coming along very well. Great to see that multi-screen support is actually on the cards and not too far away. Now, another item I know a lot of people will be very interested in is DLSS support. This still has a few issues, a little bit like multi-screen, but being very much worked on, and they're very much aiming to have this implemented for Sim Update 10. So again, this one is aiming for June, and sounds like it's quite likely at this particular point. They're also going ahead with support for AMD FSR. Now, Asobo and Microsoft have been in discussion with both Nvidia and AMD on both of these particular bits of technology. Asobo also want to include FSR 2.0, although this may not quite make Sim Update 10. It's possible, but more likely it seems to come later. But all in, these are very much arriving at some point, not too far away. So very, very good news there. And I think a lot of people are going to be very happy to have the additional performance boost that these particular pieces of code and technology are going to deliver. Sticking with the subject of new content for the moment, World Update 9 is due to arrive in May. Interestingly, Microsoft have said that this is going to be the largest world update so far. As always, it will feature digital elevation maps as well as new aerial imagery. There's going to be 4 brand new bespoke airports, 105 points of interest, 13 photogrammetry cities. That's a pretty huge number there. I think usually what most of before is like something like 5 photogrammetry cities, so 13 is very, very big. 3 landing challenges, 3 bush trips, and 3 discovery flights. And you know what? I forgot to say it's actually covering the area of Italy. I think pretty much everyone knows that by now, but just thought I'd better throw that in as well. Also, just want to quickly return to the photogrammetry imagery as well as the aerial imagery. And this comes from a number of different sources, but the part that comes from Bing themselves, Microsoft, they do have a dedicated team for this, specifically for Microsoft Flight Simulator. And now this is 20 staff strong, so that's getting there quite nicely. Quite a big team really, just for that particular aspect. There was also some talk on World Update 10. Now, Microsoft are not ready to reveal what World Update 10 will cover, but something very interesting here is going to have to wait for Microsoft's keynote this year. Now, usually there's a big keynote around about the time of E3, so Microsoft are holding off this particular information for that. So hopefully there's going to be some additional surprises there. They also mentioned there is a big surprise for June coming up as well. So maybe the World Update 10 will be that, or maybe there's something else going in there as well. Meanwhile, there's a brand new trailer coming up very soon for the Top Gun Maverick DLC for The Sim. Microsoft can't talk about this at the moment, they say, due to restrictions with Paramount, but well, we'll be seeing more of that very soon. So moving away from dedicated brand new content and talking more about development issues. Something that they did mention was clouds in certain places tend to look a little bit too dark, these specifically at high altitude. Players tend to describe these as looking more like ash rather than more like clouds. So the reason for this is due to the way that the system renders and handles both cloud simulation as well as lighting. Currently, it sounds as though the whole process is fairly complex, however it needs to be far more complex to avoid some of these dark clouds. So basically it would require more simulation of lighting and how that scatters throughout clouds. Of course, that requires more computational power, which would then hit performance, so something that Asobo can't fix just yet. It's not a simple fix, you can't simply brighten up certain clouds and darken other clouds. At least that's how they described it. It's something that maybe in the future, if they ever do an overhaul of the way clouds are rendered, it's something they could perhaps look at, but it's not a simple solution. Something a number of other players have often mentioned, especially recently, are the performance and stuttering issues. Now, I noticed some of these very recently over Switzerland, pretty bad actually, dropping right down to 25 frames a second in some locations, and that's down from around about 80 frames a second down to just 25. Asobo have said they are well aware of this, and they're wondering if it's hardware related. They can't quite track down exactly what is causing it in these specific cases. They've said their internal Q&A are using the broadest possible range of configurations to test all of this, but obviously they can't have every single possible configuration that's out there, and this is why recently they've started the public beta tests for these updates. So it sounds to me at least as though some of these more long-term stuttering and performance issues that have still haven't been fixed still don't have a dedicated solution, but it's something they're well aware of and something they are still looking into. The story was pretty much the same when it comes to virtual reality. Now, Sobo said they consider VR as a full platform nowadays. They consider VR a platform in the same way they consider both PC and consoles as platforms. And this means they dedicate quite a lot of resources to making sure that VR is the best it can be, or at least at some point in the future it will be the best it can be. I know there's a lot of issues surrounding it currently. But basically the way they've got it set up now is that it means all brand new features are tested in VR. In fact, they say 1/3 of their total QA team is currently testing features in VR. But we all know it's not perfect at the moment, far from it in fact. Still very good, but well, there's room for a lot of improvement. So to help with this, Sobo have said they're going to enable additional render settings in the options to allow users to create better performance setups for themselves when it comes to VR. So I believe, at least from what I understood, that these render settings will be specific to VR rather than this the whole graphical render engine in general. Moving on to potential future content, there was some discussion on seasons. Now, this is something that Microsoft have said they do want to do, but it is very, very complicated. Basically, the simplest way to do seasons is to just change the render on, just change the shaders rather on trees, just make them change color according to the season. However, Microsoft want to think about seasons in a much broader sense. So basically, you're talking about satellite imagery changing from season to season. This obviously requires far more data than they currently have. Also, consider the way rivers, lakes, and even ice coverage change from different points in the year. All of this are things that Microsoft want to simulate. Now, there's actually different aspects to seasons. There's the aspect we've just described, so that's for the far future, something they do want to work on. But there's also how seasons themselves affect weather. This in turn affects turbulence, which, well, basically affects how you can pilot your plane. Now, all of this is already simulated, so if you fly on the different times of the year at exactly the same location or even different times of the day, you'll notice that turbulence can be very, very different. So this specific aspect of seasons is already simulated. Basically, we've got dynamic air currents in there, dynamic turbulence, and all the rest of it. So at least in terms of some of the aspects of how pilots fly planes, some of the seasonal information is already in there. But as I said, for the greater visualization of seasons, for how it makes things appear, how it makes landscape change, that is something for further down the line. The final thing I want to touch on is the Antonov AN-225. Now, many of you will be well aware that this plane was destroyed in Ukraine. I do have a video on that, it's linked in the video description, where you'll also be able to find a link to a free model of the AN-225. However, Microsoft are working on a plane for this. So this should be a high quality plane. It will be one of their famous flyers, I'd imagine, or one of their other well-known planes, which means it should be of pretty high quality. Now, one interesting thing Microsoft said here is that they want to donate profits from this particular plane when it eventually goes on sale towards getting the real plane rebuilt. Anyway, no date just yet on when to expect the Antonov AN-225 making its appearance in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but something like many other things that are being worked on. At any rate, that brings us to the end of this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.